Hey everyone, Cars here from ADifficultTruth. Welcome to the ADifficultTruth podcast. This is the first one of the year. It is a brand new year, a brand new format, and I will try to keep producing these once a week, covering multiple topics. Well, we are starting off 2020 crazier and more somber than I had liked. Hey, remember when the right, and sadly even an enclave of the left, believed that Hillary Clinton was going to start World War III? And couldn't justify voting for her, so instead they stayed home or even voted third party? Please don't take this as a defense of Hillary Clinton. She was obviously a terrible, terrible candidate, and I understand that she was just going to be more of the same, the status quo and whatnot. But at the same time, I saw Donald Trump for the threat he really was and turned out to be. Hey, remember when Donald Trump said that Obama was going to be the one to strike Iran because his poll numbers were bad and needed to do so for his re-election? Remember when Donald Trump campaigned on a promise to bring home the troops and avoid these forever wars that are ridiculous and expensive and stupid according to him? Well, that's all out the window. This past Friday, Donald Trump ordered the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani without any congressional approval via drone strike. To be clear, this man was a bad actor on the international stage, to say the least. However, this was reckless and single-handedly threatens our national security. Clearly, Donald Trump does not understand consequences and repercussions because, well, he's never actually had to face them in his life. To put things into perspective and dispel some of the nonsense talking points going around, this was not like killing al-Baghdadi or any other terrorist leader. This was a major general of a sovereign country. On top of that, he was seen as a hero to the people of Iran. Thousands upon thousands of people in Iran mourned this man's death. It is comparable to the English assassinating George Washington in the 1700s. Yes, it's like that. Let's be clear, this was not to prevent any imminent attack on U.S. assets, as the evidence for this was razor thin and was merely speculation at the time Donald Trump made this decision. What this is pretext to go into yet another forever war in the Middle East, a distraction from Donald Trump's impeachment, a diversion to ride into re-election in 2020. Nothing more, nothing less. What is more infuriating is that there was a Pentagon official or officials who thought that this was a good idea to even present this as an option to an unhinged, irrational, deranged president. Warmonger George W. Bush was presented a similar opportunity but chose a different option because even he knew the consequences and potential fallout. Barack Obama, who made countless of drone strikes, was again presented this similar option but did not take it. According to the New York Times, the excuse is that Pentagon officials sometimes offer an extreme option to make the others seem more palatable. But it is insane to me that any official would think that Donald Trump would be anything but irrational, unless, of course, they wanted this. Donald Trump is nothing more than a useful idiot who is bumbling into a conflict he himself does not understand. He continues to issue threats over Twitter because, well, apparently that's how we do foreign policy now, and is openly saying he is prepared to commit war crimes. Let's take a look at his most recent tweet storm. Quote, Iran is talking very boldly about targeting certain USA assets as revenge for ridding the world of their terrorist leader, who had just killed an American and badly wounded many others, not to mention all of the people he had killed over his lifetime, including recently hundreds of Iranian protesters. He was already attacking our embassy and preparing for additional hits in other locations. Iran has been nothing but problems for many years. Let this serve as a warning that if Iran strikes any Americans or American assets, we have targeted 52 Iranian sites, representing the 52 American hostages taken by Iran many years ago for, I don't know why, but okay. Some at a very high level and important to Iran and the Iranian culture, and those targets and Iran itself will be hit very fast and very hard. The USA wants no more threats. These are just the ramblings of a deranged madman who happens to be in control of the world's largest military. According to recent headlines, Iran offered $80 million for the head of Donald Trump, $1 for the rough estimate population of Iran. This is not a joke or to be taken lightly. They are preparing to retaliate against military targets in the region, possibly our Navy ships or any of the many bases we have there. Right now, Americans are going to end up paying the price for Trump's incompetence and irrationality. Once again, we hear the beatings of war drums on both sides, and chants to death to America are echoing in the streets of Iran. Thousands of American troops have been mobilized to the region as we speak. Iraq recently passed a resolution to ask all American troops to leave the country. If Iraq forces all U.S. troops out and turns to Iran, then we've lost Iraq. Almost 2 decades for nothing. Thousands of American troops lost for nothing. Thanks to the Afghan papers, we knew it was a farce from the beginning, and yet somehow, here we are on the cusp of war. Oh, and Republicans? Yeah, you share some of that blame too. You have the power and responsibility to remove this man. I don't know how you can sleep at night knowing you had a hand in the upcoming American casualties, but I guess that's just who you've been. Soulless warmongers who do not actually care about our troops. I wonder, if all the able-bodied children above 18 of Congress, or Congress members themselves, and the executive branch had to go first, would we be in this situation now? Republicans, if you're so eager to fight this war, then why don't you go? Or send your kids, brothers, fathers, instead of other people's children, brothers, and fathers. This is not like Iraq or Afghanistan back in 01 to 03. This is not going to be a walk in the park. We are increasingly alone thanks to Donald Trump, and I'm not sure our traditional allies will follow us into this endeavor, except for maybe out of self-preservation, maybe the UK. America is fighting itself alone, without allies and on the brink of war. I can't help but think that there's only one person who benefits from all this, and that's Vladimir Putin. Okay, quick break and we will be right back. Welcome back from break. Our next topic, which I alluded to earlier, is impeachment. I've refrained from saying much on impeachment because I wanted to see how the process would play out, but I think it's a perfect time to talk about it so we don't forget. Now that we're in 2020 and election year is here, we have an impeached president, the third president in our nation's history. So let's start at the beginning. Article 1 of the Constitution gives the House of Representatives the sole power of impeachment. Impeachable offenses as stated by the Constitution include treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. This was not defined for a reason. Alexander Hamilton described impeachable offenses as arising from the misconduct of public men, or in other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. Such offenses were political, as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to the society itself. According to this reasoning, impeachable conduct could include behavior that violates an official's duty to the country, even if such conduct is not necessarily a prosecutable offense. Now, this is important. The purpose underlying the impeachment process also indicates that non-criminal activity may constitute sufficient grounds for impeachment. The purpose of impeachment is not to inflict personal punishment for criminal activity. Instead, impeachment is a remedial tool that serves to effectively maintain a constitutional government by removing individuals unfit for office. Grounds for impeachment include abuse of the particular powers of government office or a violation of the public trust. Once the House decides that an official has committed an impeachable offense, the House begins an impeachment inquiry. If the evidence found is sufficient, the committees involved in the impeachment inquiry will recommend articles of impeachment. Once articles of impeachment are drafted, there are hearings to amend and vote on the final articles of impeachment that will ultimately be sent to the floor for the full House of Representatives to vote on. Now, they have to vote on each individual article. If any of the articles of impeachment pass with a simple majority, then the next phase begins, a trial in the Senate. The proceedings in the Senate unfold in the form of a trial, more or less, with each side having the right to call witnesses and perform cross-examination. The House members essentially act as the prosecution and the impeached official as the defendant. Senators act as the jury, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presides over the Senate trial. The Constitution requires a 2/3 supermajority to convict an official. If an official is convicted, the official is automatically removed from office and may also be barred from holding future office. Let's also keep in mind that even though this is a trial, this is not an actual criminal proceeding. Now that we have an understanding of how the process is done and why it's done, let's go over Donald Trump's impeachment and try to dispel some of the Republicans' attempt to distract and divert from the facts. Donald Trump is being impeached for two things: abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. This was all in relation to the aid that was appropriated by Congress for Ukraine and was withheld by Donald Trump in the exchange for an investigation, or at least an announcement of an investigation, into Joe and Hunter Biden. Abuse of power is appropriate, as it was proved that Trump in fact used his position as president to levy aid previously appropriated by Congress to get President Zelensky of Ukraine to announce an investigation into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. The second article, obstruction of Congress, is also appropriate, as Donald Trump has repeatedly ignored congressional subpoenas, which in and of itself is an offense which any normal person would have suffered consequences for, and yet Trump has suffered zero. Trump has repeatedly ordered aides and other officials not to testify or ignore subpoenas. These are not the actions of an innocent person. These are the actions of someone who obviously is trying to cover up something. If he is so innocent, why not call up the witnesses that can exonerate him? Why not testify himself? If he does that, he could make the entire Democratic Party look like fools and ride that into 2020. But he didn't. These facts are not debatable. This is what happened. However, Republicans are choosing to defend this president using two main deceptive tactics. Number one, attacking the process. They continue to complain that this process is unfair and that Trump did not receive due process, when in reality, Trump and the minority have been offered every opportunity to present their side and they have refused. Also, as I mentioned, this is not a criminal trial. When you don't have any sufficient defense, what you do is attack the process as a defense lawyer. This means that they have no real defense except to just continue to stall and attack the process in every way, shape they can. Stalling and wearing out. As some of you may have seen in the impeachment hearings, if you had the willpower to stomach hours upon hours of stalling and then going on about things that weren't even relevant, then you are a true champion. But that was not by accident. Republicans purposely use their time to muddy the waters, go into irrelevant tangents to confuse and get sound bites that paint this historic impeachment as incomprehensible with no strong evidence, and this wasn't a big deal. Nothing is really going on here. So far, that has worked out really well for them, unfortunately. Now we get to the important questions. Was it worth it, and was it necessary? The answer to both is yes, although with some nuance. It was worth it in the sense that this can be used against Donald Trump in 2020 if the Democratic Party plays this right, but I have little faith that they will. And yes, it was absolutely necessary, as this president has no regard for the rule of law and needs to be shown that no one is above the law. He is not king here, and he cannot, and I quote, do whatever I want. The nuance here is that there's so much more the Democratic Party could have impeached him for and didn't. If they were patient, they could have waited for the investigation into his finances to be completed, as there is clear indication that Trump was involved in some kind of money laundering scheme and also potential bank fraud by artificially inflating and deflating values of his properties to secure loans. There's also the emoluments clause. Trump has yet to divert from his businesses and is openly and blatantly profiting off the presidency. We can go on and on about the laundry list of things that the House could have impeached Donald Trump for, but in the end, they just went with the two. In my opinion, that was a mistake. The House ended up voting for both articles, mostly on party lines. So we have an impeached president. Now what? Nancy Pelosi has refused to send over the articles of impeachment, hoping to get a better shake with how this trial is going to proceed. Mitch McConnell seems to be unwilling to negotiate much, although this is to be expected. This guy is an abomination to our democracy. In fact, the Senate is trying to change the rules, making it so that they don't even need the House to send over the articles. They just want to go into the trial, acquit Donald Trump, and let him do his exoneration tour. Mitch McConnell has already stated that he will be in full cooperation with the White House regarding the impeachment trial. Now, granted, I know this is not a criminal trial, but just imagine for a second if a defendant got to coordinate his trial with the jury. That is no fair and impartial trial.
Americans who might have concerns about your ability to be an impartial juror, given your comments that you are coordinating with the White House, you're working closely with them. What is your message?
I'm not an impartial juror. This is a political process. There's not anything judicial about it. Impeachment is a political decision. The House made a partisan political decision to impeach. I would anticipate we will have a largely partisan outcome in the Senate. I'm not impartial about this at all.
The Constitution clearly states that senators must act as impartial jurors, not be in full cooperation with the White House. I honestly don't see any version of this where Trump actually suffers any real consequences, but it is still the House's duty to impeach and our duty to make sure we vote in 2020. Quick break and we'll be right back. Okay, we are back from break. It seems like we have an addendum to the Iran story. Last night, January 7th, Iran attacked 2 air bases hosting American troops. We have not gotten the full details as this is developing, and Donald Trump has yet to make a statement, but it seems like there is no US casualties as of yet. If there is any other updates, we'll try to make a separate video addressing that. Okay, for our last story, we have to talk about the Australian wildfires. This is yet another clear example of what we can expect if we do not address the climate crisis. We're going to go over a great article by NPR, and I will leave the link in the description below. Quote, "The outbreak of wildfires in Australia has reached a tipping point. Thousands of residents were evacuated this week as bushfires reached the suburban fringes of Sydney, the skies turning blood red. Coastline towns in the states of New South Wales and Victoria were also consumed by the blaze, leaving thousands homeless. And to think people like Tucker Carlson are saying that climate refugees are made up. Many are stuck behind fire lines, trapped without power or cell service. The Associated Press reports that 12.35 million acres of land in Australia has been burned. For comparison, and this is crazy, the 2018 California wildfires burned less than 2 million acres, according to the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. So let's pause and put that into perspective. The California wildfires, which were crazy, unprecedented, and also climate change related, these Australian wildfires were 10 times that. So things are obviously getting worse, and we need to start doing something about it yesterday. The smoke blocking Australian sky is visible from space. Choking haze drifted to neighboring New Zealand over 1,000 miles away. The death toll from the fires, now in their 5th month, has risen to 24. At the time of the article, it was 24. We now have an update. It's unfortunately 25. The Australian government took the unprecedented step to call up 3,000 reservists to battle the escalating fires and conduct evacuations. It also deployed the Navy's largest ship to evacuate stranded residents along the coast. It is the largest military deployment the continent has seen since World War II. Prime Minister Morrison has been heavily criticized for his handling of the disaster, resisting national intervention prior to this weekend. Bushfires are typically handled by state governments, and vacationing in Hawaii must be nice, as fires escalated in December. Morrison has routinely minimized the link between extreme fire conditions and global warming, which is really the problem here. Because if politicians continue to ignore on purpose at this point, to be quite honest, I think it's pretty obvious that all this is on purpose, nothing is going to get solved. Last year was the driest and hottest year on record in Australia. The western Sydney suburb of Penrith was the hottest spot in the country on Saturday afternoon, reaching 120 degrees Fahrenheit. I've never seen anything like it in my life, Mark Fennick of Penrith told NPR's Jason Baubian, I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, while seeking refuge at a convenience store with his son Henry and their dog Lurch. While Australia is no danger to bushfires, a 2-year drought combined with record-breaking temperatures had made this fire season unusually volatile and expansive. And in my opinion, I think that records are going to continue to break year after year after year, not just in Australia, but around the world. Fire season began early around September 6th. The blazes have strained firefighting resources across southeastern states and will likely to continue for weeks. And here's the real tragedy. Sadly, the ecological toll of this year's fire season is not fully known, but likely catastrophic. Professor Chris Dickman at the University of Sydney estimates that 480 million mammals, birds, and reptiles have been affected in the state of New South Wales since September. Dr. Gundi Rhodes, a veterinarian in New South Wales, told NPR's Sarah McCammon about the devastating impacts to both domestic animals and wildlife. People are bringing parched koalas into her office. Most of the koalas we don't see. Most of them are just dead. They just can't get away. The kangaroos, the platypuses, I think they're all gone because their habitat is gone. And that is the real tragedy, in my opinion. The governments of Canada, France, and the United States have offered aid and personal support to Australia. This is true. In fact, veteran firefighters from the California wildfires are heading over to Australia as we speak, or have already headed over to Australia. This is a global crisis. These are the canaries in the coal mine. I suspect that more and more of these events are going to start happening around the world. All these natural disasters are just going to be amplified. Bigger hurricanes, extreme wildfires. If nothing gets done, this is our future. And we as individuals cannot do it by ourselves. We have to rise up as one and pressure our governments to do something, because if we don't, then this planet is just not going to be habitable in decades. Who knows? I hope that people start realizing the real threat that this poses.
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity and climate justice. They also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. So a 50% risk is simply not acceptable to us, we who have to live with the consequences. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. Today, that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you.
Anyway, guys, that is all the time I have today. Thank you so much for listening. If you are on SoundCloud, please hit that like and follow button. If you're watching this on YouTube and like this format, please leave a like and comment to let me know. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the little bell so that you don't miss a thing. You can also follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/ADifficultTruth. You can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ADifficultTruthOfficial. And you can now follow us on Twitch at twitch.tv/ADifficultTruth. Come be a part of the conversation, and I hope to see you guys in the next episode. See ya!
So caught up in the day-to-day, just keeping your head down and fighting to survive. We float by each other like ghosts every day, ignorant to the struggle, the fight with one another, complacent with the fact that our systems are broken, with the fact that the top 10 will always be first in line, the fact that we are killing our planet and allowing them to keep us divided. We must stand together and rise up. It's time we wake up, and that is a difficult truth.